All right, we are officially live. We are going to wait until we can get some people in the chat. A lot to talk about with this UCLA game and a lot to talk about with what's going on with the program as a whole. So let's wait till we get some people in the chat. We'll probably wait a minute or two.
We'll dive in.
Okay, we got Houston against the Bears tonight.
What do you think, Thriller? What do you think? You think Caleb bounces back a bit tonight, or with CJ? This feels a little. This feels like a college national championship game, huh? Ohio State, USC.
Literally, yeah. Here's my hot take. I think Caleb's going to be good, but I think it's going to be, I don't think it's going to be with this offensive coordinator, Shane Waldron. I think he's really bad.
Yeah.
I think Eberflus is like a really good defensive mind, but they don't have, even with the talent they added, like Keenan is out tonight. Rome is out tonight. They're going to have guys. But, all right, guys, we got 12 people in here. We're going to start in the next 10 seconds, so we will get this thing rolling. A lot to talk about when it comes to UCLA football, man. All right. In 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. What is up, y'all, and welcome out to the Bruin Bible, a somber episode, if you will, on a Sunday where UCLA just got decimated in their inaugural game in the Big Ten, 42-13, and it wasn't particularly close. I mean, you snapped your fingers, and we were down 21-0 in this game. 3 of the first 4 drives going for touchdowns. I made the joke to you earlier that Curtis Rourke looked like Nick Patty looked in that Sun Bowl game. 300-plus yards, turnover-free football, 4 touchdown passes. This guy was on one. We had talked pregame about how good of a coach Cignetti is, and they showed a stat on the CBS, the NBC broadcast where he is top 5 in terms of coaching winning percentage at 52-9. I think Ryan Day and one other
Kirby. Yep.
And Kirby. Yeah, that's pretty elite company.
Yeah. Not bad.
I want to give a lot of credit to Kurt Cignetti and that team, but there's also a lot to talk about with how poorly coached this team looked last night, how unprepared they had with Madman a week to prepare for this game. Like, there's no excuses on the table for this team. They let up over 500 yards of total offense. And Madman, I hate to say it, man, usually, when the referees get involved to kind of help out UCLA, there's a chance there was maybe the most bogus rushing the passer call I've ever seen on Ethan Garbers, a couple questionable targeting calls, Madman. Here was how the penalties shook out. 14 penalties, for Indiana for 127 yards compared to just 7 for 74 yards for UCLA. They nearly doubled the amount. So you had that in your favor with a lot of, you're at home for the first time. You had a week to prepare, as I mentioned previously, and you get your ass kicked. There's no two ways to say it. Just a bloodbath for UCLA football. Talk to me about your reaction to the game, and then I want you to follow up that question with, in your mind, who is the most to blame for UCLA and their embarrassing start? And guys, I hate to say it's not going to get better from here on out. Our next 3 games are, LSU at Baton Rouge, Oregon. We come home, we play Oregon, and then Penn State. It's not going to get better. I thought this team had a shot at a bowl game this year, and boy, am I just, fixing my statements at this point because it looks really brutal to watch UCLA, Madman. So take the floor.
Yeah, Thriller. I mean, obviously, this is. I'm a little bit without words because this is the least positive outcome you could have had. Right? This is a game that is a winnable game, particularly given the stretch that you mentioned. And then over the course of the week, we talked about UCLA going from kind of expected to win to being an underdog. The line went from 2.5 to 3 to 3.5 at kickoff. So, you and I both had UCLA kind of prevailing by 3. I believe you were 27-24. I was 30-27. We thought it would be a wildly competitive game. But to lose, not just, getting the L on the board, but in the fashion and in the manner that it was, is what is so disheartening, perplexing. And it just makes you wonder, this program is back at the studs level in terms of being able to need to rebuild. And Will, I go back to sort of our conversations over the course of the week on this show. What did we say? We said there were kind of 2 elements here. This was going to be a game that was going to be played on the first level of the defense and the third level of the defense, right? We said the linebackers are going to be more in containment mode. They're going to be more in supplement mode, but this is all going to be about the pass rush and the ability to generate a pass rush and the ability to defend that dynamic offense on the back end. And if you look at how this game played out, you talked about Rourke. 25 for 33, 307 yards, 4 touchdowns. He was peppering it all over the place. But Will, the two key stats for me that just stand completely out. One is Indiana was 9 for 12 on third down. They got anything that they wanted in terms of from a third down perspective. Many of those were third and longs, third and sevens, third and nines. More than half of them were what we would characterize as third and long. And then the second key statistic was 0 sacks. And so when you're talking 0 sacks and you're going 9 for 12 on third down, and you've got a quarterback that completed nearly 80% of his passes and clean sheet, 4 touchdowns, 300 plus yards, that tells you the first level of the defense got absolutely boat raced. The third level of the defense got absolutely boat raced. And so the keys from a defensive perspective and a scheme perspective just came to bear there. And then when you flip it on the other side, Will, offensively, we thought there would be momentum that would be generated from the second half of that Hawaii game. And you said it best, Will. It off of a bye, 2 weeks to prepare. And the very first play that UCLA had the ball, there was a miscommunication between Ethan Garbers and TJ Harden of whether or not that was going to be a pass or a run. Garbers thought it was a pass. Harden thought it was going to be a run. Harden's elbow pops the ball out, and Indiana dives on it after their opening drive, and boom, it was 14-0 right off the bat. How does that happen to a team that had 2 weeks to prepare, sitting on the sideline? You're getting the first 8 to 10 plays scripted. How does that possibly happen? And then going through this particular game, Will, outside of that touchdown drive at the end of the first half where Garber scrambled for 20. There was a little bit of another pop play to Flores for 22, found Matavao for 15. And then that first maybe screen pass in the third quarter to TJ. There was nothing offensively at all to speak of over the course of these 4 quarters. And so you just wonder right now in terms of coaching, where is this team mentally right now from a preparation perspective? DeShaun Foster had 2 weeks to prepare in this opener, and you lose by 30. And we had Eric Bieniemy's sort of vaunted offense, quote unquote, and it's put up 14.5 points, Will, over 2 games. And so you got nothing to really hang your hat on offensively. You got nothing to really hang your hat on defensively. These were presumably the first 2 easiest games of the schedule. You walk out of here 1-1 barely. If Hawaii doesn't sort of commit some self-inflicted penalties, you could be walking out of here 0-2. You and I have talked about this gauntlet. Look, let's lay it out there, Will. This is 1-4. Let's put that out there. The probability of this team being able to win any one of these next 3 games, I got a better chance of getting hit by lightning. This is a 1-4 situation right now. And when you look at the ESPN FPI, the Football Probability Index of every game from now until the end of the season, UCLA is an underdog in every game from now until the end of the season. So, Will, we're in a very challenging position here. All the honeymoon period with DeShaun Foster is clearly over, and we're now in a situation where things could get a lot worse before they get better.
Yeah, man. And there's a lot of areas to point the finger at in this game. I think where I would start directly would be just the immediate coaching staff. And you look at these successful programs within the Big Ten and what these coaching staffs are. And I'm not even going to mention to you the top of the line coaches like your Ryan Days, your James Franklins, your Lincoln Rileys, whatever. Let me go through some of the coaches we have in this conference that are just average in this conference. Brett Bielema for Illinois. He's got them in the top 25 once again. This guy took Wisconsin to back-to-back Rose Bowls in the late 2000s. This is a very qualified head coach. Let's go to Matt Rule at Nebraska, a guy that has inherited, 2-1 win teams from Temple and Baylor and took them to perennial 10-11 win teams when he was done there at the college level. He succeeded everywhere he's been at the college level. Luke Fickell, who got his ass kicked this weekend against Alabama, my friend. This guy is a two-time national champion coordinator for Ohio State. And, I mean, he took Cincinnati to the 14 playoff. I mean, just 2 years ago. This is a really good coach. Kirk Ferentz, 11 straight bowl games. Like, this is what it is. And then even PJ Fleck, a guy that the UCLA fan base, a large portion of them scoffed at for us throwing this name out there. 5 of the last 6 years, he's taken the Gophers to a bowl game with how bad the Minnesota Gophers program has been moving forward. And you look at what this team is comprised of. DeShaun Foster, first-time head coach, had never even had any coordinator experience in this position. I love DeShaun. I think it was a huge miscalculation to just kind of accelerate from a running back coach to a head coach. It's not his fault. He did not make that decision. But for that decision from him to go to running backs coach, that's very different from calling the offensive plays, having some semblance, having control of one side of the football, to go to the head coach right there. Okaika Malloy, first-time defensive coordinator, man. Like, he had never left the defensive line before this. And trust me, I love the D-line last year. I love the running backs room with DeShaun Foster. But it is so different when you're managing one position group to go into running the entire show on the defense or the whole team in general. And then you have Eric Bieniemy, man. And we talked ourselves into this for the love of the Chiefs and what they've been able to kind of breed at the football NFL level, right? 2 Super Bowl championships. This is a team that has defined this era of football. But you know what, man? Andy Reid is arguably the second greatest coach of my lifetime watching football, only to the great Bill Belichick. The last time Eric Bieniemy was an offensive coordinator at the college level was Colorado in 2011 and 2012. And do you want to hear what those total offenses went?
Yeah,
do you want to hear what those total offenses went?
Yeah.
109th and 120th. And you have to remember, this was before expansion of Division I. There was 124 teams nationally. So he ranked in the bottom 15 offenses for those 2 years at Colorado and then went back to the Chiefs. It's easy to look good standing next to a genius, but when you got to do it on your own, it's a little bit different. So there's a lot of concern there, Madman, when it comes to that coaching staff. I know everybody wants to get on Martin Jarman, and there's a lot of reason as to why. The Chip Kelly situation was incredibly weird, Madman. We talked about it. This was the 4-game stretch that occurred last year. They lose to albeit a very good Arizona team when it came to the end of the season last year, 27-10. We can give them that W. The following week, they lose 17-7 to Arizona State with no quarterback for ASU. Colin Schlee is out there. We're sending text messages going like, what the hell is going on out there? Bryce Pierre, who is our tight end now, was playing a lot of those snaps at quarterback for Arizona State, and we still lost the game. Unexcusable loss. Then we go and beat USC, 38-20. And this is not even just a blanket statement. This is not even overreaction. That was the worst defensive USC team I've seen in my lifetime. In my lifetime. That should not count as a victory in any couple of ways. I know they had Caleb Williams out there. I know it was the rivalry game. Congrats for beating a team that couldn't hold their jockstrap on the defensive side of the football. And then, the magnum opus of these losses, Madman. The 33-7 game to little brother Cal to close out the regular season. Just abysmal. We're all calling for Chip Kelly's head. And I want to show this article because I think this will present a lot of what a lot of people are saying. You can blame Martin all you want for this, but here's the reality of the situation. I'm going to scroll down for you guys on this one. UCLA's athletic department was already on tenuous financial footing. It has run up a $167.7 million debt since the fall year of 2019 and recently was ordered by the University of California Regents to pay $10 million per year to them. So with that being said, Madman, a lot of people are going after Jarman's head right now, but there's also a guy that was ahead of him, the chancellor at the time, that I think with the calamony payments, with that enormous debt, and I know we're buying different spots around, for this university to try to add to the place. But man, when you're $170 million in debt, there's not a whole lot you can do. And I think that was kind of a way that Chip and Martin were able to work that out, where it came down to the point where it's like, Chip, I know you want to leave. We don't want you to be here either. Let's find the best way to do this. so we don't have to pay the $8.5 million that we owe you. And eventually Chip leaves for Ohio State, $1.5 million paid for it. Listen, his buddies Ryan Day, I'm sure they go out and pay for it. So there's a lot of, places at hand here that you could point the blame to, Madman. Long story short, but I just think the coaching staff is inadequate, and I think a large portion of that was we could not fire Chip Kelly when we wanted to. Are any of those statements fair? And I just want to hear your thoughts on what I just laid out for everybody.
Yeah, Will. I mean, it's a great layout. I'm glad you provided the context. I mean, let's take it kind of step by step here. First step, let's talk about DeShaun. I think we both love DeShaun as a Bruin. We've had the opportunity to spend time with DeShaun at an individual level. Truly bleeds UCLA, great alum. I think there's a world where he can grow into this job in the future and be successful down the line, but he's just not there yet. It's obvious. He's in over his head. He's not ready for this job. I mean, this is a double promotion. This is like in the equivalent in the corporate world. You go from a manager to a vice president, and you skip being a director, or, you go from director to being CEO, you skip being vice president. I mean, it's such a massive jump to go from a positional coach to be the head coach of a program, to be the CEO of a program. And we've seen it at every step of the way. Will, he struggled with the media time and again. He struggled with execution, play calling these first two games. He's just struggled with the overall just plan and strategy and preparation moving forward. He's in over his head. It's obvious. Now, he's hired Eric Bieniemy. He's hired Malloy. He was obviously in a tough situation. To your point, he himself was only hired end of January, early February because of the Chip Kelly saga, right? And, Chip, so much of that conversation was, should he have gotten fired? He should have gotten fired earlier. Why didn't he get fired earlier? Given the roller coaster of last season, that was the case. And then the question becomes, well, then, the person who has hired DeShaun Foster, the person who ultimately has to put this team together from, a decision-making perspective is Martin Jarman. But then you look at Martin Jarman and you say, Martin Jarman's a young athletic director. This is really his first big-time AD job. He was there at Boston College, but this is his first time big AD job. He's inherited a whole debt situation. And it was sort of his idea to move UCLA to the Big Ten in the first place to sort of get out of this debt situation, and so, so much to unpack here, Will, but I'm really glad that you went all the way to the chancellor level, because I really want that to be where this conversation is, because that's where it appropriately needs to be, Will. The same folks that are sort of clamoring for DeShaun to get fired were the same folks that wanted Chip to get fired, and the same folks that wanted Mora to get fired, and Neuheisel to get fired, and Durrell to get fired. And the same people that are saying Martin Jarman should get fired are the same people that are saying Dan Guerrero should have gotten fired. At some point, it's a very limiting response. You can't fire everybody. At some point, you have to sort of look inside the mirror and say, if our answer to everything is just fire this person and fire this person and fire that person, and everything is going to be okay, it is a symptom. It's not the cause. And the cause ultimately will, and this is where it gets existential, it gets deep, it gets raw, it gets real. It comes down to, how much does UCLA want to play top-end football from a university perspective? How much of a priority is it? And I'll lay it out in this way, Will. Chancellor Charles Young was the chancellor for UCLA for 29 years. From 1968 to 1997. He's regarded as a visionary chancellor in the history of UCLA. He understood the value of sports and the value of football on how it plays in terms of the vitality of the university overall, whether it's applications, whether it's funding, whether it's, just positioning strategically. He understood the value of football and of sports overall to that entire ecosystem. Chancellor Young's last year at UCLA was 1997. UCLA's last year in football, when they won the conference and made national noise, was 1998. That is not a coincidence. And we went from Chancellor Young to Chancellor Albert Carnesel, who didn't share that vision of the importance of football. He wanted UCLA to be the Harvard of the West, the public Harvard, if you will, of the West, and really kind of took away some of the policies and the mechanics and the philosophy around making sports important. And then he was chancellor for 7 or 8 years. And then Chancellor Gene Block was more of a status quo person off of what the previous administration was. And you've seen it, Will. Over the last 26 years, UCLA football has 3 10-win seasons. And 2 of those 10-win seasons were directly related to the fact that the team across town was on sanctions and UCLA had a much wider recruiting pipeline than they normally would. This ultimately, Will, comes down to the top. This is about the chancellor's priorities, and the people that put the chancellor in power, those selection committees. How much do they value football? And we have a new chancellor that is starting January 1st, Will, Julio Frank, who comes from the University of Miami, which has a historic football program. The question is going to be, at 72 years old, how much does he want to emphasize football? Because ultimately, the degree to which he will emphasize football, then everybody around the chancellor makes that a priority. And Will, we never like to compare, but just take an example across town. Carol Folt, president of USC, she has 4 moonshots in terms of her tenure. Athletics is one of them. She literally has said athletics is one of her 4 moonshots. She's laid it out there. It's very clear. It's very obvious. When you look at the Michigans and the Texases and the Ohio States and the Alabamas and down the line they go, look at how important football is to sort of the ethos of that culture. You wonder, where does UCLA stand in terms of how important football is? It starts with the chancellor, and then the people around the chancellor buy into that philosophy. And when they buy into that philosophy, Will, that's when you go get top donations for football. That's when you hire the top athletic directors. That's when you hire the top coaches. And that's when it just becomes this domino effect of dominance, and when you don't value it, this is sort of what happens. You have guys and gals that are in positions that perhaps they're a little too young for, they're not quite ready for, and they're inheriting very difficult situations. So to me, Will, this isn't necessarily about fire this person or fire that person, because we've been saying it for 20 years. We've been wanting to fire everybody at 3 or 4 years. It's deeper than that. At some point, the age-old saying goes, when you sort of break up, hey, it's not you, it's me. At some point, you have to say, look, this is me. This is a me problem. How many times can we keep going back to the well of saying we're just one hire away? You just got to fire this person. It really comes down to the chancellor, the leadership. Leadership starts at the top. You set the direction of the organization. How badly does UCLA want to be a player, a power, a dominant force in football? And the answer over the last 25 years, the last quarter century, Will, is mediocrity is acceptable for the football program. This is a basketball school. As long as they put a winning record together and beat USC, that's considered a success. And if that's the success, let's just share that and say that's what success is for football. But if we want more, it has to start from the top.
Yeah. And you alluded to the point I was about to bring up. It just seems like they have those horses blinders on, where it's, how have we done against USC? And for the last 15 years, I believe it's been close to 500 within that series. So there's been consistent winning on both sides for UCLA and USC in these certain situations. And it begs the question, like, let's flip that score from last year. It's 38-20 UCLA. If it's 38-20 USC, I actually think, Chip, there's no choice but to fire Chip Kelly. But just the reaction that was shared there, Martin coming in the locker room after the game with the victory bell, them touting it. They brought it to the basketball game. I remember you were at the game then the following, Tuesday after the Saturday game, and they brought the bell in and they were excited. And there's a lot of that to the rivalry games, but it just begs the question, man, like, how serious do we want to take this? And you saw this alumni association rally when it came to basketball this offseason. Mick Cronin was raving about it. He goes, and I think it's like a direct quote from the article in the LA Times. He goes, look at our recruiting class compared to last year. There's no secret science to this. It's NIL. Like, this is exactly what's happened. We got the All-American late with Trent Perry. We had the number 1 transfer portal class. And what breaks my heart, man, is like, for a university that has national championships with them, Heisman Trophy winners, Dude, I was throwing on the highlights 1998 Texas against UCLA, Cade McNown. We're beating Texas. Like, UT
49-31. I even remember the score, Will.
Unbelievable. And we all remember the Miami game, for the BCS that kind of cost us a shot at the national championship. It's just one of those things where this program has been historic for so long. And I'm watching Sunday football again today. Carson Steele making impact plays for the Chiefs. Charbonnet got a touchdown today. Like, we have guys that make an impact within the league and onwards within the football program. It just seems to think, for me, that this university has planted its flag on basketball, and that's where they're moving forward, which is very unfortunate because this team should not be bad, Madman. Like, I always reference this point from our guy, Bill Conley. ESPN, he's like a statistician when it comes to college football. We brought back 70% of our productive talent from last year. Yes, we lost Latu, who's irreplaceable. I'll be the first to admit it. Muwasa was huge. Murphy twins. Outside of those four guys, we pretty much bought everyone back and then upgraded some positions due to the transfer portal. Off of an 8-win team that won a bowl game last year. You know what I mean? So there was a lot. The statement that we don't have talent, I think that's BS.
That's totally false. Yep.
That's completely BS. I think we are so poorly coached right now that we don't stand a chance in a conference where not only do the trenches matter, which is our, one of our weaker points, but I just laid it out, man. These coaches are next, even like Greg Schiano. Like, this guy was an NFL head coach. He revived Rutgers himself. He's back at Rutgers. Like, the level of coaching in this conference is not 2021 Pac-12 where it was Kyle Whittingham and everybody else. You have Herman Edwards and like Jake Dickert. Yeah, you could probably scheme up against those guys. These guys are a little bit different. I'm just at a loss for words, Madman. So it's
no Thriller. I mean, it's a great point, and I want to double click on a couple of things that you said. One is the most painful part for me last night wasn't the score, it wasn't the outcome, it wasn't even the coaching. The most painful point for me last night was with 5 minutes left in the game, and Indiana had the ball, and you could hear the chants of goodbye from the Indiana fan base in your home opener. And that said it all right there, because there was about 47,000 in attendance. Will, I think it might have been 60-40 UCLA, Indiana, but there was a lot of red out there yesterday. And obviously there was a lot made about moving the student section and making it more centralized. And, some sections, the student section felt a little kind of spread out, a little diluted. And that pained me more than anything else, because it showed that, the attendance, the engagement, the passion will yet again is waning very deeply. And you said something great, Will. When you think about UCLA basketball, this is now a top 3 NIL program in basketball. I mean, it's Kentucky, Duke, UCLA. Mick has gotten the reinforcements, the alums, both from the NBA as well as the very successful alums that UCLA has in all industries, but in entertainment and business here in Los Angeles and all over the world. They have ponied up. UCLA is going to be a power in basketball yet again for years to come, be perennial top 3, top 5, Final 4, threatening for the national championship every year. And I think what has happened, Will, you mentioned, I grew up on those teams, Will, the 20 straight, that's the team I grew up on. Okay. I was 12, 13 years old for the 20-game win streak, 97, 98 with Cade and DeShaun and Danny Farmer and Freddie and Brian Poley-Dixon and all those guys. That's the team I grew up on. And the world has changed, Will, since 98. I mean, we talk about Chancellor Young's last year was 97, and that was 98. That was Terry Donahue's last recruiting class. That was his last recruiting class that became seniors. And after the late 90s, Will, as the salary cap and free agency exploded in the NFL and it became much more about monetary outcomes, this went away from being just a regional sport, and then with the advent of the BCS, you had the guarantee of number 1 versus number 2. You had the national championship. It became much more of a national sport, and it became much more of a financial sport. And what that meant was that you had to level up. You had to put even more into it. Remember, Will, we talk so much about, we talk about NIL today. What was the big investment 10 years ago, if you recall? It was facilities, if you remember, right? I mean, it's like, who's got the best football centers and the best football complexes. And fortunately, UCLA, thanks to Casey Wasserman, has stayed very, very relevant and at the top end there. But it takes so much more effort now and resources and money and time and passion to stay on top. And Will, that's just going to continue over time. In the 80s and the 90s, UCLA could, when it was more regional, when the money wasn't just bonkers in the NFL, you could rely more on just being UCLA, being the best school, having the best campus, having the best weather, the best academics, all of those things. Nowadays, these kids are not just coming to a university, they're coming to a football program. They are majoring in football. And so the emphasis and the resources has to just be so much greater. And we've kind of, been neutral. We've kind of put one leg in the toe and then put it back out. And it takes both feet in the pool, both arms in the pool, your face in the pool, and you have to go absolutely all in. And so one of the first things that Chancellor Julio Frank is going to have to decide is how realistic is it for UCLA to be able to go all in on basketball and football, given where this thing is going from an NIL perspective, a transfer portal perspective, a revenue share perspective, the professionalization of college sports perspective, as well as the preservation of the other Olympic sports that I know mean very much to the UCLA community. And so the answer to that question may be, hey, we may just have to kind of go all in on basketball and be sort of, flatlining a bit on football. As long as it's a winning record, that's considered success. Or if you want to go all in, because you are UCLA, it can happen. A school like Michigan is able to kind of go in both. They got a great basketball program. They got a great football program. UCLA and Michigan are eerily similar in terms of academics, in terms of culture, in terms of resources. I mean, eerily similar. So you can do it. You can go all in, but it's not going to be off of the playbook that you have right now. It's going to take a whole transformation of the athletic department in terms of priority and strategy and focus. But that transformation can only be told from through the top. So it's going to be fascinating here, Will. The new chancellor is going to have to decide how much of a football program this is going to be.
Yeah, man, it's frustrating on a lot of different fronts. And, I just want to say, man, it's going to be a long, rough year. And I just want fans to buckle their seatbelts for what is about to transpire. It's going to be, we're going to lose this next 3 games. I don't think we have any chance the way we've looked. We've scored 2 offensive touchdowns in 2 games. I don't see us going into Death Valley and winning. I don't see us against Oregon. Even after that, though, Rutgers, they're just a well-coached team, which we are not right now. And they had a top 20 total defense last year. I'm favoring Rutgers in that game. I'm favoring Minnesota. I think the last question I'm going to leave you off with is for DeShaun Foster in the fan base's mind to keep his job. And I'm throwing out bowl game because I don't think it's going to happen. We had Indiana penciled in as a win. Curt Cignetti is a phenomenal coach. We give him a lot of credit. But we had this penciled in as a win when they had 31 new transfers coming in compared to us returning 70% of our talent. What is a reasonable win-loss record for UCLA if DeShaun Foster is going to keep his job in the eyes of UCLA fans and be encouraged going into 2025?
Yeah, Will, it's a great question. And to your earlier point, I'll answer it in 2 parts. The first is this is absolutely a coaching problem right now, because I'm just going to double and triple down on what you said, Will, just to try and debunk any sort of mythology that is out there on social media. Because I've been hearing things about, Chip kept the cupboard so bare and, we have to sort of inherit that nonsense, absolute nonsense. You're talking about Ethan Garbers, who's been 4 years in this program, a very experienced quarterback, someone you saw light up the LA Bowl last year, someone you saw beat USC last year as your signal caller. You've got 2 very viable running backs in TJ Harden and Keegan Jones, who have both been deeply successful wearing UCLA colors over the past several years. You have the deepest wide receiver room we have ever had. Okay, when you talk about J. Michael Sturdivant, Rico Flores, Titus, Logan Loya, the leading receiver of last year's team, can't even start on this team. That's how deep the wide receiver room is. And then when you flip it to the other side, You still have that interior powerful tandem in Jay Toia and Keanu Williams. You have Oladipo, Medrano, Ali Cahow in terms of the linebacking room with John Vaughns. And then you got guys in the secondary like Kirkwood, like Davies. You said it, Will, time and again. Addison is a guy that Oregon fans were salivating over and were very upset that he left. There is plenty on this team. Granted, the edge is a problem. Granted, the offensive line is a problem. But outside of that, there is plenty on this team to do a heck of a lot more than what is going on right now. So this is absolutely a coaching problem and not a talent problem. And Will, with that as the context, how do we look at the remainder of this season? Look, I'm going to kind of look at it from a reverse perspective. You know, sitting at 1-1, we've talked about it. These next three, it's not going to happen. 22.5-point underdog at LSU. And then, you know, Oregon, Penn State, you're talking about teams these are playoff teams. These are teams that are trying to vie for, you know, seeding to go and win a national championship. And with the way the coaching is, it's 1-4. I have to put the other quote unquote games that you're punching above your weight. I think at Nebraska is going to be a very difficult game. It's going to be in that type of situation. Raiola looks like the real deal. Matt Rule, that crowd. I mean, for God's sakes, Will, Nebraska has sold out every home game since like World War II. I mean, you know, that's going to be a very difficult game. And then it pains me, you know, to say this from a UCLA perspective, blue and gold, bleeding blue and gold. I think the SC game that there's a talent discrepancy there that I don't think is going to be able to be matched this particular year when it comes to coaching. So you sort of take those out and you say that's 5 games. So you're at 6 losses at that point. So now in order to make a bowl game, you got to kind of run the table on all these other games. Now, how realistic is that? where we sit right now? Unlikely. But I think what I'm looking for, Will, for DeShaun to be able to keep his job moving forward, I think the only scenario where he doesn't keep his job, Will, is if this thing goes to 1-11 and we see no improvement whatsoever over the course of the season. I think even if we can see some improvement over the course of the season, he gets more comfortable as a coach. They start playing better. The games are more competitive. Even if it ends up 3-9, 4-8, I think he comes back the next year. I think there's kind of an acknowledgement that this is sort of a multi-year process. So I think that short of this thing going, call me crazy, but short of this thing going 1-11, you know, and this just flatlining from here on out, I do believe DeShaun will be back next year, with the caveat being, does the new chancellor in January say these are unacceptable standards for UCLA? And if he does that, then all bets are off. But if we are assuming that it's going to be sort of business as usual from a top level strategic perspective, then I would say short of kind of a 1-11 flat line, even if it's 3-9, 4-8, I do see DeShaun coming back next year.
Yeah. And man,
unfortunately, but that's just where we are.
Yeah, I feel it. I think this was, as long as Martin is manning the ship, I think it's going to be a multi-year process with DeShaun. Granted that they just don't get embarrassed for the rest of the year, which, I mean, you just can't rule out at this point, given what transpired in the first 2 weeks. You know, I want to take it back to the other 3 coaches that came before DeShaun, whether it's Neuheisel, whether it's Jim Mora, whether it's Chip Kelly, because we've talked about it. The chancellor that you previously mentioned leaves UCLA's football program. It kind of, you could see it deteriorate year after year. Was there, we talk often about Rick Neuheisel, him coming in here, putting the billboards up in LA, bringing optimism to UCLA, getting recruiting classes. I'd say there was a lot of optimism with the Jim Mora years. You mentioned those 3 10-year wins. Pretty much 3 of those were all with Jim Mora, for those first 3 seasons there. And then just the hype around Chip Kelly coming in. I'm not talking about the end result. If you look back and you don't know what the future is in all 3 of those situations, I'd argue those 3 are very, very good hires at that time. It's just a matter of trying to get the brand of UCLA football back in the minds of fans and recruits that we are a serious program. And buddy, it just doesn't feel like a serious program right now.
Yep.
Because, we've been doing this for 4 years and we put a lot of time and effort into this. And when you see your team just get obliterated on a Saturday night to a team that like I
Won 3
mentioned,
games last year.
won 3 games last year. I know Signetti is fantastic. Like, he is a great coach, but they took in 31 new transfers from last year. Like, from a familiarity standpoint, of players playing together, UCLA had the advantage night and day in that. We talked about basically the whole offense comes back. 3 offensive linemen, Garbers, both running backs, his top 3 receivers from there's so much, communication and coordination between these guys that have been here before. But it's just so disheartening to see that. And that's why I believe it's just a flat out coaching issue right now. And there's nothing we can do. We have to wait this out. I root for DeShaun Foster. This guy's a former
Absolutely.
Bruin.
We love DeShaun. He's a great man. He's a great Bruin. It's just a tough situation. Will, I mean, it's like this. If I told you tomorrow, Will, you get the opportunity to be the CEO of Google tomorrow. It's like, you'll be like, of course, I'll take it. Absolutely. But are you going to feel confident that you can sort of do the job after, 24 or 48 hours? I mean, that's kind of the situation that DeShaun is in. And I don't think it was necessarily in a negative way. I think Martin sees potential. Martin sees, what could be. I think these are both very well-intentioned individuals that are very, high character and care very deeply about the school. It's a very tough predicament. And I'll go back to 2 things, Will. You mentioned about the last 25 years of chancellors, whatnot. I think there were 2 inflection points where this thing could have been a little bit different. One is, I think if Rick got 1 more year, there is a world where Neuheisel is still the coach of UCLA. Because everybody forgets Brett Hundley was Neuheisel's recruit. Mora didn't recruit Hundley. Mora didn't recruit the talent from 2012 to 2014. That was all Nick Neuheisel. Mora won with Neuheisel's players. And the moment Mora had to win with his own players is when the thing sank. And so Rick Neuheisel had that secret sauce because he cared so deeply about UCLA and because he had such a deep history. He was head coach many times. Will, he won a Rose Bowl with Washington in 2001. Everyone forgets. Really great mix of experience and UCLA passion. There is a world today where if we just gave him 1 more year and let him have that 2012 year, because he cared so much about Hundley, because he was such a good man, he redshirted Hundley in 2011 because he thought he had 2012. And we let him go after 2011 because it was after the 50-0 debacle against SC. He just couldn't move forward. So there's a world there, Will, number 1. And the number 2 inflection point, and this is where leadership matters and strategy matters. You sit down with Chip and you say, we're going to bring in a director of branding and comms. That person is going to run recruiting. That person is going to make all of the decisions on recruiting. You just say what you want. I want this type of player with this type of specifics, this character, this height, this weight, this skill set. You give me your menu. You give me your menu on what you want, Chip, and we are going to entrust this person to go build a roster for you. It's almost a pro-style situation, Will, where you've got a head coach and you've got a general manager, and you bring in a general manager to say, I'm going to build a roster, deal with the recruiting, and deal with the media for you. Can you imagine what that would be? What's the knock on Chip? Everybody wants to pile on Chip because he didn't recruit. He disengaged with the fans. But you can't argue with the mind on the field. So you say, let's double down on his strengths and all of his weaknesses, which I completely agree with. You put it into a general manager. But that takes leadership. That takes direction. And so those are the 2 inflection points, Will, that could have been slightly different. A little bit more patience with Rick and looking at things outside of the box with Chip. And so let's hope we learn from that and move forward.
And I think and it was part of luring him to UCLA, but I also think they gave Chip just too much power as a coach. I mean, the funny thing is, the Lincoln Riley, Alex Grinch dynamic was at Westwood before it was there. Jerry Azzinaro was there for 3 years.
Exactly.
And we talked about it was the same thing that happened to USC, where it's like, boy, if this team could just get a top 60 to 70 defense, do you know how good this team could be? And that was the case. And Azzinaro, like Grinch, was Chip's buddy for a long time. And just the thing that breaks my heart is, like, if they were in a better situation financially, this is why I still believe UCLA can be great, man. It's like, if you had offered these 3 people jobs right now, I know they would have taken it. Whether it was Jonathan Smith, who was born in Pasadena, in Pasadena area. His reason for leaving Oregon State, he was as blatant as you could possibly be. He goes, Michigan State's moving to a big-time conference. I want to coach in a big-time conference. That was not exactly the direct quote, but it was essentially what he said when taking the Michigan State job. You got Jedd Fisch, who wanted to be here.
Oh, Jedd Fisch. Oh, my God. That's the one, Will. Yeah.
And, I know he lost in the Apple Cup, but give this guy time. I've seen it at Arizona. I think he's going to build Washington into a top 5 team in the Big Ten moving forward. There's a lot there. And then, man, it's just, God, it's so frustrating on so many different levels. PJ Fleck, I feel like, would have welcomed a change to Westwood as is kind of the momentum he's built up in Minnesota. It can only go so far. If you get that guy with that high energy, high level of recruiting, I think you bring him to UCLA, it's going to be a game-changing situation. So those 3 guys, I feel like would have been all in on coming to Westwood had they been properly courted. Even Curt Cignetti, like who knows?
Yeah.
This guy.
No, Will, I'm so happy that you mentioned kind of the possibility of the hires, because it's just so easy to keep going to this sort of fire narrative, fire this person, fire that person, and to tie it all the way back home. And I know we'll get out here soon, Will. The reason we were in debt is because of the firing. I mean, it was the premature firing of Mora, dead money, premature firing of Steve Alford in basketball, dead money, so the idea of just, let's go fire, and everything's going to be fine. There are implications. There are deep financial implications when you keep having to do that. This is where you get into debt, and then this is where you have to sort of accommodate for that debt. So it's much more complicated than just that. That's why these are symptoms. These are all symptoms of a much deeper problem, and that is an existential one. How much do we want to be great in football? Because all of the elements are there. To your point, Will, there's 500,000 alums who, if you resonate with them the right way, you can do it. There is a global brand. This is the #1 public university in the country, with the #1 most beautiful campus in the country, with the #1 best student life in the country, with the #1 best cuisine in the country. You've got LA around it. You've got the history of great athletics. You have everything you need to be successful. The question is, do you have the willingness to spend the time and have the courage to put all the resources together?
Yeah. And, to build off this point that Tony laid out, I agree in some circumstances, but if you might remember, we were a top 3 dining team last year. We were paying like $1 million for nutrition on top of that. I mean, you look at the Wasserman Center, granted, I mean, I just think most of the NIL is directed to basketball, which is unfortunate because I really think this football team could be something special if you just put the time and effort into it. Guys, thank you for tuning in. It's going to be a long season, but we're going to be there to report every step of the way. Stay with us, guys. There's light at the end of the tunnel. We're hoping for the best. Just stick it out, man. 4's up, Bruins. Basketball season is close, and we're going to be doing basketball this year full time, guys. So it's going to be a lot of fun. So stay tuned for that. I hope you guys have a great rest of your job.